Hello, this is some old guy in Hawaii, and this is a look at how Infusion does damage over time. It's not a comprehensive guide to everything Infusion can do. There are other guides by other content providers that do a much better job of that. Best ones are probably from Moxsy, who's done at least 3 videos on Infusion. I'll probably try and link those in the description below. There's some good guides on Gearbox forums as well. Now, the subtitle is not clickbait. I actually believe that. I'll lay out my evidence for it, and more interestingly, why I believe people thought it was broken in the first place as I go along. So if you don't already know, Infusion is Amara's Tier 1 Red Tree skill that converts a portion of her gun damage to her selected action skill element in 8% increments. Okay, if you put 5 points in it, 40% of your gun damage becomes fire, shock, or corrosion, whatever element you have equipped. More if you have a class mod that boosts Infusion. Okay, this can do 3 things. 1, it can make a non-elemental gun do some elemental damage, exclusive of any anointments. 2, it can make an elemental weapon do more than one type of elemental damage at the same time, also exclusive of any anointments. And 3, if we have an elemental weapon and an action skill element that match, it will do apparently nothing, which makes sense. If we convert 8% of the damage of a shock weapon to shock, we should get the same base damage we had without Infusion. Okay, and that's what happens, and that's fine. Okay, that's base damage. What effect does Infusion have on damage over time in each of these 3 situations? Well, there's 3 questions we need to answer for each one of these, and they are: 1, does Infusion trigger damage over time? 2, if so, how big a dot does it trigger? How large a damage over time figure? Okay, and 3, if so, what is the percentage chance that Infusion will trigger damage over time? So, quick cap without Infusion. This is a shock and fire Wester gun with fire selected. Okay, base damage is 641. Damage over time per second is listed as 1369. Base fire damage versus armor on TVHM is minus 50%. So we should be seeing about 320, 321 base damage. Now, damage over time is applied in thirds, 3 times per second. If you don't already know this, there's a link to my video on damage over time in the description below. So 1369 divided by 3 is 456. Base damage over time should be approximately 456, but versus armor on TVHM, again, minus 50%. We should get a range of numbers right around 228 plus. Okay. Now that variation in numbers you see bubbling up is normal. Don't ask me why, ask Gearbox. All damage over time works that way. So I spec 1 point into Infusion. Okay, so now 92% of my original 641 is fire, which is 590, and 8% is my action skill element, shock, which is 51. Okay, fire versus TVHM armor gives 295. My action skill element is shock, which is 35 or minus 35% versus TVHM armor, or 33. So we should see 295 fire and 33 shock base damage. Okay, so damage over time operates the same way. 1369 divided by 3, 456. Okay, so the 92%, 8% split gives us 425 and 36 shock before the modifiers. 425 versus TVHM armor is about 210 plus. 36 shock versus TVHM armor is 23 plus. So when I start firing, I may proc the fire dot, I may proc the shock infusion dot, or I may proc both. There you go. So that answers questions 1 and 2. Okay. When spec'd into Infusion, an elemental weapon does 2 types of damage if the weapon's element and the action skill element are different. And just like the gun's regular base damage, damage over time will be a fraction of the listed elemental damage proportional to however many points are spec'd into Infusion. Just like the base damage, 8%, 16%, etc. It's common sense, actually. So that leaves question 3. What is the percentage chance that Infusion will trigger damage over time? And the answer is the same percentage chance for the weapon when it's not spec'd into Infusion. I know this because I did a lot of testing, more than I'm showing here. These are test logs for a number of different fire elemental guns with different percentage chances to proc damage over time. Single shots across the top, separate rows for fire and shock dots. Every time I observed the dot proc, I stuck a 1 in that column. Now the colored entries are when both elements proc damage over time simultaneously. Everything is totaled up down on the right or the lower right corner, you can see how many shots out of the total proc damage over time as a percentage. Now those percentages for each gun, each element, equal the listed proc chance plus or minus the margin of error. Now what these numbers mean is that when we spec into Infusion with an elemental weapon, the weapon and the action skill elements are different. Each element has the same chance to trigger damage over time, and that chance is whatever it is for the gun's given element. Okay, 2 separate dots with the same percentage chance to proc, whatever the base chance is for that weapon. 2 separate dots, same percentage chance to proc. Okay. What happens though if we batch elements? What if, for instance, both the weapon and the action skill are shock? Well, this is where I get to the subtitle of the video. Okay, early on in the Borderlands 3 release, some people observed that Infusion appeared to be seriously nerfing elemental gun damage over time with matched elements. Or at least that's what people believed they were seeing. A smaller Infusion dot appeared to completely override the gun's listed base dot figure. Now this appeared to be fixed, supposedly, sometime around early November. The Infusion dot reportedly no longer overrode the gun dot damage. Okay, all was right with the road, yes? Okay, what I've got here, I have no gear, no skills, no guardian rank on this siren. This is the same shock fire Wester gun, but now with shock selected. Base damage is 641. Base shock damage versus armor on TVHM is minus 35%. So we should do 417 shock. Here you go. Okay. Now damage over time is applied in thirds, 3 times per second. So base dot should be approximately 456, but versus armor on TVHM, we should get a range of numbers right around 297 plus. Okay, there you go. Okay, that's before Infusion. Now I spec 1 point into Infusion. I have shock selected as my action skill element. What happens? Well, base damage is still 417. That makes sense. As I said earlier, when we convert 8% of our damage from shock to shock, we still got 100% shock. Okay, but what about damage over time? Well, watch what happens. The dot is now sometimes 273 and sometimes about 24. What's going on here? Well, Infusion is giving us 2 different dots. We have 1 point in Infusion, 8% converted to our action skill element. 8% of 297 is 24, and 90% of 297 is 273. We are looking at 2 different dots, just like we see with differing elements. It's also the same percentage chance each. These are test results utilizing shock for both gun and action skill. One test with a single point Infusion and the other with 5 points. Okay, the proc rate for both large and small dots, however, are statistically identical and match the Wester gun's listed chance of 19%. Now notice, however, that there are no dual procs, no observed procs of 2 different size dots at the same time. Okay, there can't be. If there were, in the case of the single point Infusion, it would appear as a full-size dot of 297, but that never happened. Every dot was either around 24 or 273, and that is significant, okay? Because when we are talking about the same element from the same weapon type, a gun, only one of these dots can exist at one time. This is how damage over time works. I'm not going to go into detail on this because I already did so in an earlier video on damage over time. I mentioned it's linked below. The important thing to understand is that when we have an elemental status effect in place doing damage over time and another damage over time proc of the same element from the same source type, in this case a gun, occurs, one of 2 things happens. Okay, number 1, if the size of that new dot is at least 50% the size of the existing dot, the new dot will replace the existing one. Okay, it won't cancel out the damage already done by the first dot, and it won't stack on top of it. It stops the old dot in its tracks and starts doing its own listed damage, and will do that for however many seconds it normally lasts from that point on, unless the enemy dies first or it's replaced by another dot. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2 is if the new dot is less than 50%, less than half the size of the existing dot, it will not replace the existing dot. It won't even actually proc. We won't even notice it. Okay, now what this all means is that unlike base damage, if we match elements with Infusion, we will on average never do as much damage over time with that element as we might without Infusion. And the more we spec into Infusion, the less dot we will do in matched element situations. That's just the nature of Infusion. Now, nobody fires weapons slowly, one shot at a time during gameplay like I did during testing. Okay? Now, they don't have to. Because of the 50% cutoff, if we spec 4 or fewer points into Infusion and match elements, we may never even notice the smaller dot. Okay, will only show up if the previous larger dot has already run out, and as soon as another large dot procs, the small one gets swallowed up. Okay, 4 points into infusion means the large dot will be 68% of the listed value, and the smaller will be 32%. And 32% is less than half of 68%. Okay, once we spec 5 or more points into infusion, however, the smaller dot crosses that 50% threshold. 6% versus 40% for 5 points, 52 versus 48 for 6, 46 versus 54% for 7, etc. I don't know if there are any class mods that will add more than 3 points to infusion, but that's beside the point. In those situations, the real question is, why the hell are you speccing into infusion and matching elements? That's not what the skill was designed to do. If you spec heavily into infusion, you should just be aware of this and plan accordingly. So what does this have to do with people thinking infusion was broken? Why do I think infusion was never bugged? To begin with, 3 reasons. Okay, first one, it's still essentially doing what people said it was when they thought it was broken. I just showed that. 2, we had a brand new game, whole bunch of new mechanics, and very few gamers who really understood how it all worked together, including me. Okay, a lot of people didn't understand how damage over time worked. They didn't understand that the number listed on the card is applied in thirds, 3 times per second. Few, if any, understood the large and small matching element dot interaction I just explained. Many probably still don't understand these things. Okay, I went back and looked at some of the videos made about this problem a few months ago, and where possible, did the math on the listed damage figures, the various mods, and the actual resulting damage numbers. And they looked about right to me. The numbers added up. A lot of people just didn't understand what they were seeing. Early in the game, if you spec'd 5 full points into infusion, the largest dot you would see would be 60% of what the listed value was divided by 3. So if you were expecting 1,000 per second, because that's what's on the card, you'd instead see numbers around 200 and go, what's going on? Okay. Third big reason, Gearbox never said a word. Okay. Gearbox has been really good about telling us when they make changes, especially fixes, to Vault Hunter skills, even minor ones, even going back to those first couple months. Now, I combed through all the patch notes and other official communication from back then, and I couldn't find one reference to infusion anywhere. If something were actually wrong, I'm pretty sure they would have told us they fixed it. Okay? So that's why the video subtitle. And that's also mostly how infusion works with damage over time, matching elements in particular. Now, to be fair, I haven't covered how this works with non-elemental weapons. Non-elemental weapons can proc damage over time, both from infusion and or an anointment, and that's easy enough to prove. There you go. Okay. The actual size of the dot is more involved. You can figure it out for any weapon just by testing it, but there's actually more to it and how the game mechanics work. Most importantly, though, I have not covered the percentage chance to proc damage over time with non-elemental weapons, weapons that don't have a chance or a listed chance to proc. Okay, and that's actually a larger issue, one that I'm not going to go into right now. That's a separate video I'm working on about damage over time and non-elemental weapons in general, both damage size and percentage chance. Okay, so these are not actually difficult things to figure out, but there's some work I still have to do. It's not a huge mystery. Other videos by other YouTubers have touched upon it. I just want to pin down as many of the numbers as possible first. Okay, hopefully that will be in the next video. Okay, hopefully. I may be enjoying the DLC like everyone else, though, by that time, so it may take a while. In any case, I hope you learned something. Drop me a comment, give me a like, and thanks for watching.